The emergency room at Denver General Hospital buzzed with its usual chaos on a Tuesday evening in late October. Dr. Marcus Rivera had been pulling double shifts for the past week, covering for colleagues who had fallen ill with the seasonal flu. His scrubs were wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled, but his hands remained steady as he moved from patient to patient with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years saving lives in far more challenging circumstances. Marcus paused at the nurse's station to review the next case file. A woman in her early 30s had been brought in unconscious after a motorcycle accident on Interstate 25. Multiple lacerations, possible concussion, and a dislocated shoulder. The paramedics noted she had been wearing full protective gear, which likely saved her life when she was thrown from her bike after hitting a patch of black ice. "Room 7, called out Sarah, the charge nurse, nodding toward the trauma bay. "Just came in about 10 minutes ago. Still unconscious, but vitals are stable." Marcus grabbed the chart and made his way through the maze of gurneys and medical equipment. The emergency department was understaffed as usual, with patients overflowing into the hallways. He had learned to navigate this environment during his residency, but it was his previous experience as a Navy SEAL medic that truly prepared him for working under pressure. The skills he had developed treating wounded soldiers in Afghanistan had translated seamlessly to civilian medicine, though the stakes felt different here. In combat, death was an ever-present reality. In this hospital, every life saved felt like a small victory against the chaos of the world. As he pushed through the curtain of Room 7, Marcus was struck by an immediate sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. The woman lying on the gurney was unconscious, her face partially obscured by oxygen tubing and medical tape. Her auburn hair was matted with dried blood, and her left arm hung at an unnatural angle. Despite the injuries, there was something about her posture, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of discipline and control. Marcus began his examination methodically, checking pupils for signs of brain injury, palpating her abdomen for internal bleeding, and assessing the damage to her shoulder. Her breathing was steady, and while she had several deep lacerations on her arms and legs, none appeared life-threatening. As he worked, he found himself studying her face more closely. There were small scars along her jawline, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Her hands, despite being scraped from the accident, showed calluses that suggested regular physical training. "Doctor, her wallet was in her jacket pocket," said Jenny, one of the newer nurses, handing him a worn leather billfold. "No emergency contacts listed, but there's an ID." Marcus opened the wallet and felt his breath catch. The driver's license read Elena Sofia Guerrero, but it was the second card that made his hands tremble slightly. A military ID, though it looked to be several years old. The photo showed the same woman, but with shorter hair and wearing dress blues. Staff Sergeant, United States Army. His mind raced back through memories he usually kept locked away. Afghanistan, 2018. A forward operating base near Kandahar, where his SEAL team had been working alongside Army units on counterinsurgency operations. There had been a female soldier there, a medic with the 82nd Airborne, who had impressed even the seasoned special operations guys with her skill and composure under fire. Marcus looked back at the unconscious woman, and suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Elena. They called her Doc because she could patch up wounded soldiers while under enemy fire without breaking a sweat. She had saved 3 members of his team during a particularly brutal firefight when their convoy had been ambushed. He remembered her calm voice talking them through their injuries, her steady hands working to stop bleeding while mortar rounds exploded around them. But there was more to the memory, something that made his chest tighten with a familiar ache. Elena had been one of the soldiers caught in a roadside bomb explosion during their final week in country. He had been the medic who treated her that day, working frantically to stabilize her before the medevac helicopter arrived. She had been conscious then, gripping his hand while he applied pressure to a massive wound in her leg, whispering that she was scared she would never walk normally again. "Dr. Rivera." Jenny's voice snapped him back to the present. "Her pupils are responding. I think she's coming around." Marcus moved to Elena's side as her eyelids fluttered. He could see the moment consciousness returned, the way her body tensed as awareness of her situation set in. Her eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits and potential threats in a way that was distinctly military. When her gaze finally settled on his face, he saw a flicker of recognition, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. "Ma'am, you're in Denver General Hospital," Marcus said in his most professional voice, though his heart was pounding. "You were in a motorcycle accident. You're safe now." Elena tried to speak, but only a raspy croak emerged. Jenny quickly provided iced chips, and, after a few moments, Elena found her voice. "How bad?" she asked, the question every soldier learned to ask first. Not "where am I?" or "what happened?" but "how bad?" because knowing the extent of damage was crucial for survival. "Dislocated shoulder, multiple lacerations, and a mild concussion," Marcus replied. "Nothing that won't heal." "You were lucky." Elena's eyes narrowed as she studied his face more carefully. "Do I know you?" Marcus hesitated. Part of him wanted to pretend they had never met, to maintain the professional distance that would make this easier. But, looking into her eyes, he knew she deserved the truth. "Afghanistan," he said quietly. "FOB Chapman, 2018. You probably don't remember much about that last day." The change in Elena's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her face went completely white, and Marcus could see her heart rate spike on the monitor. She tried to sit up, then immediately fell back as dizziness overwhelmed her. "Doc Rivera," she whispered, and he was surprised she remembered his name. "The SEAL medic." "That's right." Elena closed her eyes tightly, and Marcus could see her struggling with memories that were clearly still painful. When she opened them again, there were tears threatening to spill over. "You saved my life that day," she said so quietly he had to lean in to hear her. "You saved mine first," he replied. "Multiple times." They stared at each other in silence for a long moment, the beeping of monitors and distant hospital sounds fading into background noise. Marcus found himself cataloging the changes in her appearance since Afghanistan. She was thinner now, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of too little sleep and too much stress. The confident soldier, he remembered, seemed to have been replaced by someone who carried a heavy burden. "I need to reduce your shoulder dislocation," Marcus said, forcing himself back into doctor mode. "It's going to hurt, but waiting will only make it worse." Elena nodded. "Do it." As Marcus prepared the procedure, he couldn't help but notice how Elena's entire body tensed in preparation for pain. It was more than just anticipating discomfort from a medical procedure. There was something else there, a hypervigilance that suggested she was constantly prepared for threats that others couldn't see. "On 3, Marcus said, positioning his hands carefully. 1, 2. He manipulated the joint quickly on 2, knowing that anticipation often made the pain worse. Elena's gasp was sharp but brief, and Marcus felt the shoulder slip back into place with a satisfying pop. Her relief was immediate, though she continued to breathe heavily from the residual pain. "Better?" he asked. "Much." Elena flexed her fingers experimentally. "You still have good hands. Document." As Marcus began cleaning and suturing the deeper lacerations on her arms, he found himself stealing glances at her face. There were questions he wanted to ask, but he wasn't sure he had the right to ask them. What had happened to her after Afghanistan? Why was she here in Denver? Was she still active duty? "I know what you're wondering," Elena said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "I got out 3 years ago. Medical discharge." Marcus kept his focus on the suture he was placing, but he could hear the bitterness in her voice. "The leg, among other things." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Turns out getting blown up has some long-term side effects they don't warn you about in basic training." Marcus wanted to ask more, but something in her tone warned him off. Instead, he continued working in silence, methodically cleaning each wound and checking for debris that might have been missed during the initial assessment. "What about you?" Elena asked, still jumping out of perfectly good airplanes and patching up Navy boys who think they're invincible. Despite himself, Marcus smiled. Got out 5 years ago. Went to medical school. Finished my residency here last year. Turns out civilian medicine is almost as challenging as combat medicine, just in different ways. Almost. Nobody's shooting at me while I'm trying to start in 4. For the first time since regaining consciousness, Elena's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. That does make a difference. As Marcus worked, he found himself remembering more details from their time in Afghanistan. Elena had been one of the few female soldiers at their forward operating base, and she had faced the additional challenge of proving herself to men who weren't always ready to accept women in combat roles. But she had earned their respect through sheer competence and courage. Marcus remembered how she had once crawled under fire to reach a wounded Afghan interpreter, dragging him to safety while enemy rounds kicked up dirt around them. "Elena," he said carefully as he applied antibiotic ointment to a particularly deep cut on her forearm. "Can I ask what you're doing in Denver?" She was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Running mostly." Marcus looked up from his work, meeting her eyes. There was pain there that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. "From what?" Elena turned her head away, staring at the ceiling. "Ghosts. Nightmares. The usual post-war tourist attractions." Marcus felt his chest tighten with understanding. He had his own collection of ghosts from Afghanistan, memories that visited him in the early hours of the morning when sleep proved elusive. But he had been lucky. He had resources, family support, and access to the kind of help that many veterans didn't receive. "Are you getting help?" he asked gently. Elena's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You mean therapy? Medication? Support groups where we all sit in a circle and talk about our feelings?" She turned back to look at him. "I tried all that. Document turns out some things can't be fixed with the right combination of pills and talking." Marcus finished the last suture and began applying bandages. He wanted to argue with her, to tell her that healing was possible, that there were treatment options that could help. But he also understood that everyone's journey through trauma was different, and some wounds took longer to heal than others. "The motorcycle," he said. "Is that new?" "Bought last month. There's something about the speed, the focus required to stay alive on the road. It's the only time my brain actually shuts up." Elena flexed her newly bandaged arm carefully. "Guess I should have been more careful about black ice." Marcus made a note in her chart about follow-up care for the sutures. But his mind was racing with concerns that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. Elena seemed to be self-medicating with dangerous behavior, seeking out situations that provided temporary relief from psychological pain. He had seen it before, both in fellow veterans and in civilian patients struggling with trauma. "Elena, I have to ask, are you having thoughts of hurting yourself?" She looked at him sharply. "You asking as my doctor, or as someone who knew me before?" "Both." Elena considered this for a long moment. "I'm not suicidal, if that's what you're worried about. I'm just lost. It's like I left part of myself back in that desert, and I can't figure out how to get it back or how to live without it." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The transition from military to civilian life was difficult for everyone, but for those who had experienced combat, it could feel like stepping into an alien world where nothing made sense anymore. "Where are you staying?" he asked. "Motel 6 off Colfax." Marcus frowned. The area around Colfax Avenue was known for its high crime rate and transient population. It wasn't the kind of place where someone recovering from injuries should be staying alone. "Do you have anyone you can call? Family? Friends?" Elena shook her head. "My parents passed away while I was overseas. Never married, no kids. Army was my family, and that's over now." The loneliness in her voice was heartbreaking. Marcus made a decision that probably violated several professional boundaries, but he couldn't bring himself to care. "I'm going to keep you for observation overnight," he said. "The concussion protocol requires it anyway. But, Elena, when you're discharged tomorrow, I want you to consider some options." "Like what?" "There's a program here in Denver, specifically for veterans. It's not traditional therapy. They use adventure-based healing, outdoor activities, group support. It's run by a guy named Tom Patterson, former Marine who went through some of the same struggles you're dealing with. Elena's expression was skeptical. More touchy-feely group therapy? No, it's different. These are all combat veterans, people who understand what you've been through. And it's focused on action, not just talking. Rock climbing, hiking, whitewater rafting. Things that challenge you physically while building connections with people who get it. Elena was quiet, considering this. Why are you telling me about this? Marcus finished updating her chart and set it aside. Because 8 years ago in Afghanistan, you saved my life. You save a lot of lives. And because I think the person who was brave enough to crawl under enemy fire to help wounded soldiers is still in there somewhere. She's just buried under a lot of pain and confusion. Tears that have been threatening finally spilled over, rolling down Elena's cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, as if showing emotion was a sign of weakness. I don't know if I can do it, document. I don't know if I can trust people again, or if I even want to. Marcus pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down. You don't have to decide tonight. Just think about it, okay? And, Elena, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you for surviving this long. I know it doesn't feel like it, but making it through each day when everything feels hopeless, that takes courage too. Elena closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Will you be here when I wake up? I'll be here until my shift ends at 6 a.m. After that, Dr. Martinez will take over your care, but I'll check on you before I leave. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. As Marcus dimmed the lights and prepared to leave her to rest, he found himself thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together again. In Afghanistan, he had been the one providing medical care, while she offered covering fire and emotional support. Now the roles were reversed, but the fundamental connection remained the same. Two soldiers, far from the battlefield, trying to find their way back to something resembling peace. He made a mental note to call Tom Patterson in the morning. If anyone could help Elena find her way back to herself, it would be someone who had walked the same dark path and emerged on the other side. Marcus had seen too many good soldiers lose their battles with invisible enemies after surviving everything the war had thrown at them. He wasn't about to let that happen to Elena, not if he could help it. As he walked back toward the nurse's station to check on his other patients, Marcus realized that seeing Elena again had stirred up his own buried memories and emotions. Tonight, when he finally made it home to his quiet apartment, he would probably have his own demons to wrestle with. But for the first time in years, those memories didn't feel like a burden. Instead, they felt like a reminder of who he used to be and who he might still be capable of becoming. The morning sun filtered through the hospital room windows as Elena slowly opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back in a flood of memories: the motorcycle accident, the pain, and most surprisingly, seeing Marcus Rivera again after all these years. She had spent most of the night drifting in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with a confusing mixture of hospital corridors and Afghan mountainsides. Marcus appeared in her doorway at exactly 6 a.m., looking tired but alert. He had changed into fresh scrubs, and Elena could smell coffee on his breath as he approached her bed to check her chart. "How are you feeling this morning?" he asked, his voice carrying the professional tone of a doctor making rounds, but his eyes held the warmth of someone who genuinely cared about her answer. "Like I got hit by a truck," Elena replied, attempting to sit up and immediately regretting it as her shoulder protested. "But better than yesterday." Marcus helped her adjust her position, propping pillows behind her back. "The good news is that all your tests came back normal. No signs of brain injury beyond the mild concussion. Your shoulder is stable, and the lacerations are healing well. Medically speaking, you're ready to be discharged." Elena noticed the way he emphasized medically, and she could see the concern in his expression. They both knew that her physical injuries were the least of her problems. "I talked to Tom Patterson this morning," Marcus continued, pulling up the same chair he had occupied the night before. "The veteran program I mentioned. He's willing to meet with you today if you're interested." Elena's immediate instinct was to refuse, to insist she could handle her problems on her own the way she always had. But something about the way Marcus was looking at her, without judgment or pity, made her pause. "What exactly would I be getting myself into?" she asked. "Tom can explain it better than I can, but essentially it's a community of veterans who support each other through adventure-based activities. Rock climbing, wilderness camping, whitewater rafting. The idea is that physical challenges in a safe environment can help rebuild confidence and trust, both in yourself and in others." Elena was quiet for a moment, absently touching the bandage on her forearm. "And you think this will magically fix whatever's broken inside me?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "I don't think anything can magically fix what we went through over there. But I think being around people who understand might help you feel less alone with it." There was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more carefully. "You've been through this too, haven't you? The whole lost and disconnected thing." Marcus nodded slowly. "My first year out of the Navy was rough. Really rough. I had family support, which helped, but there were days when I couldn't see the point of getting out of bed. Medical school actually saved me in a lot of ways. It gave me a sense of purpose again, something to focus on besides the memories. But you had a plan," Elena pointed out. "Medical school, residency, a career. I don't even know what I want to do next week, let alone with the rest of my life." "That's okay," Marcus said. "Tom's program isn't about figuring out your whole future. It's about getting through today and then tomorrow and building from there." Before Elena could respond, there was a knock on the doorframe. A tall man with graying hair and kind eyes stood in the doorway, wearing hiking boots and a Colorado Rockies baseball cap. "Elena, I'm Tom Patterson. Dr. Rivera asked me to stop by." Elena felt a familiar spike of anxiety at meeting someone new, but Tom's relaxed demeanor helped ease her tension slightly. He moved into the room with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. Though Elena's trained, I caught the slight limp that suggested old injuries. "Marine?" she asked, recognizing something familiar in his bearing. Tom smiled. "2 tours in Iraq. You, Army. Afghanistan." "Well then, we speak the same language," Tom said, settling into a second chair that he pulled from the corner. "Doc Rivera tells me you're having some trouble adjusting to civilian life." Elena glanced at Marcus, then back at Tom. "That's one way to put it. Mind if I share something with you?" Tom asked. "When I got back from my second deployment, I spent about 6 months convinced that everyone around me was completely insane. Civilians worried about things like traffic jams and whether their favorite restaurant was out of their preferred salad dressing, while I was trying to figure out why I couldn't sleep through the night or why the sound of helicopters made me want to find cover." Despite herself, Elena found herself nodding. It's like they're all speaking a language you used to know, but can't quite remember anymore. Exactly. And the worst part is that everyone expects you to just be grateful to be home and pick up where you left off, as if 4 years in a combat zone was just an extended business trip. Elena felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. It was the first time someone had put into words exactly what she had been feeling without making it sound like a personal failure. "So what's this program of yours actually about?" she asked. Tom leaned back in his chair. "Well, the official description is that we use outdoor adventure therapy to help veterans build community and develop coping skills. The unofficial description is that we get together with other people who've been through hell and do fun, challenging stuff that reminds us we're still alive." "Like what?" "This weekend we're going rock climbing in Boulder Canyon. Next month we're planning a 3-day camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park. In the spring, we'll do some whitewater rafting when the snow melts." Tom paused. "The activities are just an excuse, really. The real healing happens when you're sitting around a campfire at night, talking to someone who understands why you still check the locks on your door 3 times before bed." Elena found herself intrigued despite her skepticism. "How many people are in the group?" "It varies, but usually anywhere from 8 to 15. We've got former Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, combat veterans, and support personnel, men and women. The only requirement is that you've served and you're struggling with the transition back to civilian life." "And this actually works?" Elena asked. Tom considered the question carefully. Define works? Will it cure PTSD? Probably not, though some people do find significant improvement in their symptoms. Will it give you a sense of purpose and belonging that might be missing from your life right now? Maybe. Will it help you remember that you're more than just your worst memories? I think so. Elena looked at Marcus, who had been quietly listening to the conversation. What do you think, Doc? I think you don't have anything to lose by trying, Marcus said. And Tom's right about the community aspect. Having people around who understand what you've been through makes a huge difference. Elena was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. She could go back to her depressing motel room, continue her aimless wandering around Denver, and hope that somehow things would get better on their own. Or she could take a chance on something different, even if it meant making herself vulnerable to people she didn't know. What if I try it and it doesn't help? She asked. What if I'm just too broken for this kind of thing to work? Tom's expression grew serious. Elena, can I tell you something? The fact that you're here, that you survived whatever happened to you overseas, and made it through however many months or years of struggling since you got home, tells me you're not broken. Wounded, maybe. Struggling, definitely. But not broken. How can you be so sure? Because broken people don't keep fighting. They give up. And you're still here, asking questions about getting better. That tells me there's still fight left in you. Elena felt tears threatening again and blinked them back angrily. She had cried more in the last 12 hours than she had in the previous year, and it made her feel weak and exposed. I don't know if I'm ready for group activities and trust-building exercises, she said. That's okay, Tom replied. Tell you what, this weekend's climbing trip is probably too soon after your accident anyway. But we're having a barbecue next Saturday at my place. Very low-key, just some burgers and beer and conversation. Why don't you come to that? No commitment beyond a few hours, and if you hate it, you never have to see any of us again. Elena found herself nodding before she had fully decided. Okay, I guess I can try that. Tom smiled and pulled a business card from his wallet. This has my number and the address. The barbecue starts at 2, but feel free to show up whenever. And Elena? If you change your mind, that's okay too. No judgment either way. After Tom left, Elena found herself alone with Marcus for the first time since the previous evening. The morning had brought a different energy between them, less of the shocked recognition and more of a cautious friendship rebuilding itself. Thank you, she said. For calling him, I mean, and for everything else. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied. We look out for each other, right? That's what we learned over there. Elena smiled, remembering the informal code that had governed relationships between soldiers in combat. You watched your buddy's back, and they watched yours. It was simple and straightforward in a way that civilian relationships often weren't. Can I ask you something? Elena said, when you first got out, how did you know you were getting better? Marcus thought about this for a moment. I'm not sure I did know, at least not while it was happening. It was more like looking back and realizing that I had gone a whole day without thinking about Afghanistan, or that I had slept through the night without nightmares. Little things that added up over time. Do you still have bad days? Sometimes, Marcus admitted, but they're less frequent now, and when they happened, I have better tools for dealing with them, and people I can call when things get really dark. Elena nodded, filing this information away. The idea that healing might be a gradual process rather than a sudden transformation was somehow both disappointing and reassuring. What about you? Marcus asked. What's the hardest part for you right now? Elena considered the question carefully. The emptiness, I think. In the Army, especially downrange, every day had a purpose. Even when things were scary or dangerous, I knew why I was there and what I was supposed to be doing. Now I feel like I'm just existing, filling time until something happens or until I figure out what comes next. That makes sense, Marcus said. Purpose is huge. It's one of the things that makes military service so meaningful, and one of the things that makes transition so difficult. Did you always want to be a doctor? Elena asked. Actually, no. I wanted to be a professional baseball player until reality intervened during my sophomore year of college. Marcus said with a self-deprecating smile. Medicine was something I discovered during my Navy training. There was something about being able to help people during their worst moments that felt important to me. And now I can't imagine doing anything else. It's challenging and exhausting and sometimes heartbreaking, but it gives me a sense of purpose that I was missing after I got out. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking about purpose and meaning and the strange paths that led people to where they needed to be. A year ago, if someone had told her she would be having this conversation with a SEAL medic she hadn't seen since Afghanistan, she would have laughed at the impossibility of it all. "Can I ask you something personal?" Elena said. "Sure. Do you think we would have been friends if we had met under different circumstances? I mean, if we're just regular people who met at a coffee shop or something." Marcus considered this carefully. "I don't know. Maybe. But I think the circumstances that brought us together in Afghanistan and the circumstances that brought us together again here are part of who we are now. We're not the same people we were before we deployed, and we're not the same people we would have been if we had never deployed." "That's either very philosophical or complete bullshit," Elena said, but she was smiling as she said it. "Probably a little of both," Marcus admitted. "But I do know this. Seeing you again has reminded me of things I had forgotten about myself. Good things. And I hope maybe it's been helpful for you too." Elena was about to respond when a nurse appeared in the doorway with discharge papers and a wheelchair. "Time to go, sweetheart," the nurse said cheerfully. "Dr. Martinez has signed off on your release." As Elena gathered her few belongings and prepared to leave the hospital, she felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The past 24 hours had been emotionally exhausting, but for the first time in months, she felt like she might be moving towards something rather than just running away from everything else. Marcus walked with her to the hospital entrance, where a taxi was waiting to take her back to her motel. "Elena," he said as she prepared to get into the car, "I want you to know that if you need anything, and I mean anything, you can call me, day or night." He handed her his business card with his personal cell phone number written on the back. "And I want you to promise me something," he continued. "If you start feeling like the world would be better off without you in it, if things get that dark, you'll call someone. Me, Tom, the crisis hotline, someone. Promise me." Elena looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern there. "I promise." "Good. And Elena, I'm proud of you for agreeing to try Tom's barbecue. I know it's scary to put yourself out there again." As the taxi pulled away from the hospital, Elena found herself thinking about courage and what it meant in different contexts. She had been brave in combat, unflinching under enemy fire, willing to risk her life for her fellow soldiers. But the courage required to walk into a backyard full of strangers and admit that she needed help felt like an entirely different kind of bravery. Looking down at Tom's business card, she made a decision. She would go to the barbecue. She would try to be open to whatever connections might be possible there. And maybe if she was very lucky, she would start to find her way back to the person she used to be before the war changed everything. The taxi driver caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there, miss?" Elena realized she had been crying again, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like tears of desperation. "Yeah," she said, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I think I might be okay." Elena stood outside Tom Patterson's house for nearly 10 minutes before she finally worked up the courage to walk up the front path. The modest ranch-style home sat in a quiet neighborhood in Lakewood with a well-maintained yard and an American flag hanging from the front porch. She could hear voices and laughter coming from the backyard, along with the smell of grilling meat that reminded her of summer barbecues from her childhood. She had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a simple black t-shirt that wouldn't draw attention to the healing lacerations on her arms. The past week since her discharge from the hospital had been a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Part of her wanted to believe that Tom's group might offer something she needed, while another part of her whispered that she was setting herself up for disappointment. Marcus had called twice to check on her, conversations that were both professional follow-ups about her physical recovery and genuine expressions of concern about her emotional state. She appreciated his attention, but it also made her feel like a charity case in need of constant monitoring. Taking a deep breath, Elena finally forced herself to knock on the front door. Tom answered within moments, wearing a Colorado Rockies jersey and a welcoming smile. "Elena, I'm so glad you made it," he said, opening the door wide. "Come on in. Everyone's out back." Elena followed him through a living room decorated with military memorabilia and family photos. She caught glimpses of Tom in uniform at various stages of his career, as well as pictures of what appeared to be children and grandchildren. The house felt warm and lived in, a stark contrast to the sterile motel room she had been calling home. The backyard was larger than she had expected, with a deck extending from the house and a lawn that stretched back to a fence line bordered by mature oak trees. About a dozen people were scattered around the yard, some seated at picnic tables, others standing near the grill where a woman with short gray hair was flipping burgers. Elena's first instinct was to catalog the group the way she had been trained to assess any new situation. Ages ranged from early 20s to what looked like late 50s. More men than women, but not overwhelmingly so. Everyone was dressed casually, but she could spot the telltale signs of military bearing in the way several people stood and carried themselves. "Let me introduce you to everyone," Tom said, leading her toward the nearest group. "Folks, this is Elena, the one I told you about." A woman about Elena's age with auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes extended her hand. "I'm Sarah, Army, 2 tours in Iraq." "Mike," said a bearded man holding a beer. "Marines, Afghanistan." The introductions continued around the group. Jennifer, Navy, stationed in Japan. Carlos, Air Force, deployed to Kuwait. David, Army National Guard, Iraq. Elena found herself relaxing slightly as she realized that everyone was making an effort to include her without overwhelming her with questions. "What can I get you to drink?" asked the woman at the grill, who turned out to be Tom's wife, Linda. "We've got beer, soda, water, or I think there's some lemonade in the fridge." "Water's fine. Thanks," Elena said, accepting a cold bottle and using it as something to do with her hands. Elena was Army too, Tom announced to the group. "Afghanistan." "What was your MOS?" asked Carlos, using the military term for job classification. "Combat médic Elena replied." "No kidding," said Sarah. "I was a medic too." "Where were you stationed?" "Various FOBs around Kandahar province." "You?" "Baghdad mostly. Some time in Fallujah." Elena found herself drawn into conversation with Sarah, comparing experiences and discovering the kind of shared understanding that was impossible to explain to civilians. They talked about the unique challenges of being female medics in combat zones, the weight of responsibility for other people's lives, and the dark humor that had helped them cope with situations that should have been unbearable. "The worst part wasn't the injuries," Sarah was saying as they moved to claim seats at one of the picnic tables. "It was losing patients you had gotten to know. When it was just another soldier from a different unit, you could maintain some emotional distance. But when it was someone from your own company, someone you had eaten meals with and played cards with." Elena nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I had nightmares about this one kid, Jackson, for months after I got home. 18 years old, just arrived in country. Took shrapnel to the chest from a mortar round, and I couldn't stop the bleeding fast enough." She paused, surprised at how easily the words came. "I hadn't talked about that with anyone before." "It gets easier," Sarah said gently. "Not the memory itself, but carrying it around. I used to think that if I talked about the patients I lost, it would somehow dishonor them. But I realized that keeping their stories locked up inside me wasn't helping anyone." Elena looked around the backyard and noticed similar conversations happening at other tables. Mike and David were discussing the challenges of transitioning military leadership skills to civilian careers. Jennifer was talking with a younger man about using the GI Bill for college. Everyone seemed genuinely interested in each other's experiences without the awkward tiptoeing around military service that Elena had encountered in most civilian settings. "How long have you been coming to these gatherings?" Elena asked Sarah. "About a year and a half." I was in pretty rough shape when Tom first approached me. My marriage was falling apart, I was drinking too much, couldn't hold down a job. Classic train wreck veteran stereotype. And this helped. Sarah considered the question. It gave me perspective, I think. When you're isolated and struggling alone, it's easy to believe that you're uniquely damaged, that no one else could possibly understand what you're going through. Being around other people who've walked similar paths reminds you that healing is possible. Are you better now? Elena asked, not sure how to phrase the question politely. Better is relative, Sarah said with a smile. I'm functional. I have good days and bad days, but more good than bad now. I went back to school to become a nurse practitioner, specifically to work with veterans. My marriage didn't survive, but I've built a life I'm proud of. Elena found this honest assessment refreshing. Too many people seem to expect veterans to either be completely fine or completely broken, with no acknowledgement of the complex reality in between. Tom's voice carried across the yard, drawing everyone's attention. All right, everyone, food's ready. Line up and get fed. As Elena joined the buffet line, she found herself standing next to Mike, the bearded Marine who had introduced himself earlier. First time, he asked, loading his plate with potato salad. Yeah, still figuring out if this is my kind of thing. I felt the same way when Tom dragged me to my first meeting. Mike said, I was convinced it was going to be a bunch of touchy-feely therapy bullshit. And, well, it is touchy-feely therapy bullshit, Mike said with a grin. But it's the kind that actually works. Tom's got a gift for bringing people together without making it feel forced or artificial. Elena served herself a hamburger and some salad, then found herself back at the table with Sarah and several others. The conversation flowed naturally between light topics like Denver sports teams and more serious discussions about post-military career challenges. The hardest part for me was losing the sense of mission, said David, a soft-spoken man who looked to be in his 40s. In the Guard, even when we weren't deployed, there was always training, always preparing for something important. In civilian life, most jobs feel so trivial. Elena nodded emphatically. Exactly. Like I used to save people's lives on a regular basis, and now I'm supposed to get excited about quarterly sales reports or customer satisfaction surveys. Have you thought about going into healthcare? Asked Sarah. Your medic training would translate pretty well to civilian medicine. I've thought about it, but Elena trailed off, unsure how to explain her complicated relationship with medicine. I don't know if I trust myself with that kind of responsibility anymore. Because of what happened over there, Sarah asked gently. Elena was quiet for a moment, then decided to take a risk. There was an incident near the end of my deployment. A convoy ambush. I was treating multiple casualties, triaging, trying to decide who to help first. I made a call that. She stopped, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that came with this particular memory. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, Sarah said. No, it's maybe I need to. Elena took a deep breath. There were 3 soldiers wounded. One was obviously dying, massive head trauma, nothing I could do for him. One had a leg wound that was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. The third had chest trauma, breathing problems, but still conscious and talking. I chose to work on the chest wound first because I thought I could save him. The table had gone quiet, everyone listening with the respectful attention that veterans gave to war stories. The soldier with the leg wound bled out while I was working on the chest wound, Elena continued. Turns out his femoral artery was damaged worse than I initially assessed. The guy with chest trauma survived, but I've always wondered if I made the right call. That's an impossible situation, Mike said quietly. No good options, no way to know the right choice until after the fact. Intellectually, I know that, Elena said. But emotionally, I keep thinking that if I'd been better, faster, smarter, maybe both of them would have made it home. David leaned forward. Can I tell you something? I've been to a lot of these gatherings, heard a lot of stories. Every medic, every corpsman, every person who was responsible for saving lives has a story like yours. The what-ifs, the second-guessing, the guilt over decisions made in impossible circumstances. That doesn't make it any easier, Elena replied. No, it doesn't, David agreed. But it means you're not alone with it. And it means that maybe, eventually, you can forgive yourself for being human. Elena felt tears threatening again and quickly took a sip of water to cover her emotion. She wasn't used to this level of vulnerability with people she had just met, but somehow it felt safe here in a way that it hadn't anywhere else. The medical stuff is just one piece of it, she said. I also don't know if I can handle being responsible for people again. What if I freeze up at a critical moment? What if I make another wrong call? What if you save someone's life because you were there and you know what to do? Countered Sarah. What if your experience, including the hard parts, makes you a better healer than someone who's never been tested under pressure? Elena hadn't considered this perspective before. She had been so focused on her failures and fears that she hadn't thought about how her experiences might actually be assets rather than just sources of trauma. There's a program at National Jewish Health, Tom said, joining their conversation as the afternoon sun began to angle lower through the trees. They train veterans to become EMTs and paramedics. It's designed specifically for people with military medical experience who want to transition to civilian health care. I don't know, Elena said. I'm not sure I'm ready for something that's structured. That's okay, Tom replied. It'll be there when you're ready, if you're ever ready. No pressure. As the afternoon wore on, Elena found herself gradually relaxing into the group dynamic. She joined a conversation about hiking trails in the Front Range, contributed to a discussion about the best places to find authentic Mexican food in Denver, and even laughed at some of Mike's increasingly ridiculous military stories. So there I was. Mike was saying his third beer, making his gestures more animated, standing in front of my commanding officer, covered head to toe in mud and sheep shit, trying to explain why half my squad was missing and the other half was drunk on homemade wine. How do you lose half a squad? Asked Jennifer. Well, technically we didn't lose them. They were in the village whorehouse. But that seemed like information the CEO didn't need immediately. Even Elena found herself smiling at the absurdity of the story, remembering similar moments of chaos and comedy that had punctuated the more serious aspects of deployment. As the sun began to set, people started saying their goodbyes and heading home. Elena found herself reluctant to leave, surprised by how comfortable she had become in this group of strangers who no longer felt quite so strange. So what do you think? Tom asked as she prepared to call a taxi. It's not what I expected, Elena said honestly. Good different or bad different? Good, I think. It's nice to be around people who don't look at me like I'm broken when I mention Afghanistan. Tom nodded. That's one of the things we try to create here. A space where military service is just a normal part of people's backgrounds, not something exotic or tragic. When's the next gathering? We're doing a day hike next weekend up to Emerald Lake. Pretty moderate trail, beautiful scenery. You interested? Elena surprised herself by nodding. Yeah, I think I am. Great. Sarah's organizing that one, so she can give you all the details. Tom handed her a piece of paper with meeting information. And Elena? I'm glad you came today. I think you fit in well with this group. As Elena waited for her taxi, she found herself thinking about the concept of belonging. For the first time since leaving the Army, she had spent an entire afternoon feeling like she was among her own people. Not because they shared identical experiences, but because they understood the fundamental reality of military service and its aftermath in ways that civilians simply couldn't. Sarah approached her as the taxi pulled up. Hey, I wanted to give you my number, in case you want to talk before next weekend, or if you just need someone who gets it. Elena accepted the piece of paper gratefully. Thank you for everything today. Thank you for sharing your story. That took courage. As the taxi pulled away from Tom's house, Elena watched the warm light from the windows fade into the distance. For the first time in months, she felt like she had taken a step forward instead of just marking time. It wasn't a magical cure for everything that was wrong in her life, but it was a beginning. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Marcus's number, then typed a quick text. Went to the barbecue. It was good. Thank you for pushing me to try it. His response came almost immediately. Proud of you. How are you feeling? Elena considered the question as the taxi wound through the suburban streets toward her motel. Hopeful, she typed back. I think I might be ready to try feeling hopeful again. 6 months later, Elena stood at the edge of a cliff face in El Dorado Canyon, checking the rope system one final time before her climbing partner began his ascent. The morning sun painted the red sandstone walls in brilliant orange light, and the crisp October air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of Clear Creek rushing through the canyon below. "You ready up there, Doc?" called Mike from 50 feet below, using the nickname the group had given her after learning about her military medical background. "Ready when you are," Elena called back, settling into her belay position with the practiced ease of someone who had spent the better part of the summer learning to trust both the equipment and her own judgment again. It had been a long journey to this moment. The first group hike to Emerald Lake had nearly ended in disaster when Elena experienced a panic attack triggered by the sound of a low-flying helicopter. She had found herself crouched behind a boulder, hyperventilating and convinced that enemy fire was incoming, while Sarah and Tom calmly talked her through breathing exercises until the episode passed. But instead of giving up, she had kept showing up. Week after week, month after month, she had attended Tom's gatherings, slowly building relationships and trust. The group had become a second family of sorts, people who understood her struggles without making her feel like a victim or a project to be fixed. "Climbing," Mike called out, beginning his ascent up the technical route they had chosen for the morning. Elena watched his progress carefully, feeding rope through her belay device and staying alert for any signs that he might need her to arrest a fall. This particular route, called Bastille Crack, was well within both their skill levels now, but Elena never took the responsibility of being someone's safety system lightly. Rock climbing had turned out to be unexpectedly therapeutic for her. The physical demands required complete focus on the present moment, leaving no mental space for the intrusive thoughts and memories that had plagued her civilian life. The trust required between climbing partners had helped her rebuild confidence in her ability to take care of others and accept care in return. "Off belay," Mike called out as he reached the anchors at the top of the pitch. Elena began breaking down the belay station, preparing to follow the route herself. As she waited for Mike to set up his belay from above, she found herself reflecting on the changes in her life over the past half year. Most significantly, she had moved out of the depressing motel and into a small apartment near downtown Denver. It wasn't much, a studio with barely enough room for a bed, a small kitchen, and her few possessions, but it was hers. Having an address again, a place that belonged to her rather than existing as a temporary way station, had been psychologically important in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had also started attending individual therapy sessions with a psychologist who specialized in treating veterans with PTSD. Dr. Jennifer Chun was a former Army psychologist who understood the military culture and the specific challenges faced by women in combat roles. The weekly sessions were difficult and emotionally draining, but Elena was finally beginning to process some of the trauma she had been carrying around for years. "On belay," Mike's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Climbing," Elena responded, beginning her own ascent up the crack system. The route required a combination of technical skill and physical strength, jamming her hands and feet into the crack and using opposing pressure to move upward. It was demanding enough to require her complete attention, but familiar enough now that she could climb with confidence rather than fear. As she moved up the wall, Elena thought about the conversation she'd had with Marcus Rivera just the week before. They had maintained contact throughout her recovery process, meeting for coffee every few weeks to catch up and checking on each other's progress. Marcus had become something of a mentor figure, helping her navigate both the practical and emotional challenges of rebuilding her life. During their most recent meeting, he had brought up the possibility of her applying to the EMT training program at National Jewish Health that Tom had mentioned at the barbecue. Elena's initial reaction had been resistance. She still wasn't sure she was ready to take responsibility for other people's medical emergencies. But Marcus had gently pointed out that she was already doing exactly that every time she served as someone's climbing partner or participated in the group's wilderness activities. "You're already taking care of people again," he had said. You're just not calling it medicine. Elena reached a particularly challenging section of the climb and paused to rest on a small ledge, shaking out her arms to restore circulation. Below her, the canyon floor looked impossibly far away, while above, Mike's encouraging voice urged her onward. "You've got this, Doc. The hard part's almost over." As she resumed climbing, Elena found herself thinking about fear and courage and the strange relationship between them. 6 months ago, she had been afraid of almost everything, afraid of making connections with people who might eventually disappoint or abandon her, afraid of taking responsibility for outcomes she couldn't completely control, afraid of hoping for things that might not work out. She was still afraid of those things, but she had learned to act despite the fear rather than being paralyzed by it. The difference was subtle, but crucial. Fear no longer felt like a wall that prevented her from moving forward. Instead, it had become information to be processed and incorporated into her decision-making. "Off belay," she called out as she reached the top of the pitch, clipping into the anchor system that Mike had prepared. They spent a few minutes enjoying the view from their elevated position before beginning the process of rappelling back down to the base of the cliff. The descent required a different kind of trust, confidence in the rope system, and the ability to lean back in an empty space, controlling the speed of descent through friction devices. "So," Mike said as they walked back toward the parking area, coiling ropes and organizing their gear. "Tom mentioned you're thinking about the EMT program." Elena nodded, unsure how much she wanted to discuss this decision that was still taking shape in her mind. "Thinking about it, yeah. Still not sure if it's the right move." "What's holding you back?" Elena considered how to answer this question honestly. "I guess I'm worried that I'll freeze up when it really matters, or that I'll make another bad call, and someone will die because of it." Mike was quiet for a moment as they reached his truck and began loading their climbing gear into the back. I used to think that courage meant not being afraid. Like, brave people were the ones who just naturally didn't worry about consequences or getting hurt. And now I think courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And, Elena, I've watched you for months now. I've seen you talk yourself through panic attacks and then get back on the trail. I've seen you take responsibility for my safety on sketchy climbs, even when your hands were shaking. If that's not courage, I don't know what is. They drove back toward Denver in comfortable silence, the early afternoon sun warming the truck's interior, while the radio played a random mix of classic rock and country music. Elena found herself thinking about the different kinds of courage she had witnessed in the veteran group over the past months. There was Sarah's courage in going back to school at 42 to become a nurse practitioner, despite having been out of academic settings for 20 years. There was David's courage in starting his own landscaping business after 3 failed attempts at working for other companies. There was Jennifer's courage in confronting her drinking problem and working through a 12-step program designed specifically for veterans. Each person's journey looked different, but they all shared the common thread of refusing to accept that their best days were behind them. They had all found ways to transform their military experiences, including the difficult parts, into sources of strength rather than just sources of pain. "Want to grab lunch?" Mike asked as they reached the outskirts of the city. "Actually, I've got plans," Elena said. "I'm meeting Marcus Rivera at the hospital. He wants to introduce me to someone from the EMT training program." Mike grinned. "Look at you being all proactive and forward-thinking. Don't get too excited. I'm still probably going to chicken out." "No, you won't." "You know how I know?" "How?" "Because chickening out would be the easy thing to do, and I've never seen you choose the easy path when the right path was available." 90 minutes later, Elena found herself in the break room at Denver General Hospital, sharing coffee and conversation with Marcus and a woman named Lisa Hoffman, who served as the coordinator for the veteran EMT training program. The program is designed specifically for people with military medical experience, Lisa was explaining. "We know that you already have a foundation of medical knowledge and emergency response training. Our job is to help you adapt those skills to civilian emergency medical services." "What does the training actually involve?" Elena asked. 6 months of classroom work covering civilian medical protocols, legal requirements, and equipment differences. Then, 6 months of field training where you ride along with experienced EMT crews to get practical experience. Throughout the program, you'll have access to counseling and support services specifically designed for veterans transitioning to civilian healthcare careers. Elena found the structure of the program appealing. It was comprehensive enough to ensure she would be properly prepared, but flexible enough to accommodate the unique challenges faced by veterans dealing with service-related trauma. "What happens after the training?" she asked. "Most of our graduates get hired by local fire departments, hospital systems, or private ambulance services," Lisa replied. "The demand for qualified EMTs is pretty high right now, especially for people with your level of experience and training." Marcus had been quietly listening to the conversation, but now he leaned forward. "Elena, can I ask what you're most worried about?" Elena appreciated his directness. "Honestly, I'm worried about freezing up during a critical call, or making a decision that gets someone killed. In Afghanistan, when I made a mistake, it was usually another soldier who paid the price. I'm not sure I can handle that responsibility with civilians." Lisa nodded understanding. "Those are legitimate concerns, and they're actually pretty common among our veteran trainees. That's why we have such an extensive support system in place. You'll have access to peer counseling, professional therapy, and mentoring from other veterans who have successfully made this transition. Also," Marcus added, "you won't be working alone. EMTs always work in pairs, and on serious calls, you'll be part of a larger team that includes paramedics and emergency room staff. You won't be making life and death decisions in isolation the way you sometimes had to downrange." Elena found this reassuring. One of the most difficult aspects of being a combat medic had been the isolation of responsibility, situations where she was the only person with medical training available and had to make critical decisions without backup or consultation. "When would the next training cycle start?" she asked. "We have a cohort beginning in January," Lisa said. "But if you're interested, I'd encourage you to apply soon. We typically get more qualified applicants than we have slots for." Elena felt a familiar spike of anxiety at the idea of committing to something so significant. But underneath the fear was something else, excitement, maybe, or at least curiosity about what this path might offer. "What do you think?" Marcus asked as Lisa gathered her materials and prepared to leave. "I think I'm scared," Elena said honestly. "But I'm also tired of being scared being the thing that makes my decisions for me." "That sounds like the beginning of a yes to me," Marcus said with a smile. That evening, Elena called Tom Patterson to discuss her decision. She had learned to value his perspective on major life choices, partly because he had successfully navigated his own transition from military to civilian life, and partly because he had a gift for asking the right questions. "So what's your gut telling you?" Tom asked after she had outlined the details of the EMT program. "My gut says I want to try it. My brain is coming up with about 1,000,000 reasons why it might not work out." "Your brain's job is to keep you safe by avoiding risks," Tom pointed out. "But sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all." Elena found herself thinking about the metaphor of rock climbing that had become so central to her recovery process. Every climb involved risk, the possibility of falling, of getting injured, of failing to complete the route. But the risk was managed through preparation, proper equipment, and trust in her partners. Most importantly, the risk was balanced against the reward of reaching the summit, of pushing her limits, of discovering capabilities she didn't know she possessed. "You know what?" Elena said. "I think I'm going to apply." "Good for you." "And, Elena, whatever happens, you'll have a whole community of people cheering you on." 3 weeks later, Elena submitted her application to the EMT training program. The process required extensive documentation of her military medical training, personal essays about her motivations and goals, and interviews with program staff and current veteran trainees. The night before her final interview, Elena found herself unable to sleep, alternating between excitement and terror about the possibility of being accepted into the program. She decided to take a walk through her neighborhood, hoping the cool November air might help settle her racing thoughts. As she walked through the quiet streets, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been a woman without purpose or direction, struggling to find meaning in a civilian world that felt foreign and unwelcoming. The motorcycle accident that had brought her to Marcus Rivera's emergency room had seemed like just another piece of bad luck in a life that felt increasingly out of control. But now she could see that night as a turning point rather than just a random misfortune. Meeting Marcus had reconnected her with her military identity in a positive way, reminding her of her capabilities and strengths rather than just her traumas and failures. Tom's veteran group had provided community and belonging. The climbing and outdoor activities had rebuilt her confidence in her ability to take calculated risks and trust others with her safety. Most importantly, the past year had taught her that healing wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that difficult experiences hadn't happened. Instead, it was about integrating those experiences into a larger narrative about resilience, growth, and the possibility of using suffering as a source of strength rather than just a source of pain. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah, who is now working as a nurse practitioner at a VA clinic in Colorado Springs. Thinking of you tonight. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already come so far. Proud to know you. Similar messages arrived throughout the evening from other members of Tom's group, each offering encouragement and support for her interview the next day. Elena realized that somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking of herself as someone who faced challenges alone. She had built a network of relationships with people who cared about her success and who would be there to celebrate her victories and help her through setbacks. The next morning, Elena arrived at National Jewish Health feeling nervous but determined. The interview went better than she had expected, with the program staff seeming genuinely impressed by her military experience and her thoughtful responses to their questions about motivation and career goals. 2 weeks later, she received the acceptance letter. Elena called Marcus first, then Tom, then worked her way through the list of friends she had made through the veteran group. Each conversation was a celebration, but also a recognition that this was just the beginning of another challenging journey. You know what this means, don't you? Marcus asked when they met for coffee to celebrate her acceptance. That I'm probably crazy for signing up for more medical training after everything I've been through. No, Marcus said with a smile. It means you've decided to trust yourself again. And, Elena, that might be the most important healing that's happened this whole year. As Elena walked back to her apartment that afternoon, she found herself thinking about the difference between being healed and being whole. She still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with crowds and unexpected loud noises, still felt overwhelmed by civilian social situations that seemed trivial compared to the life and death stakes she had grown accustomed to in Afghanistan. But she had learned to carry these challenges as part of who she was rather than allowing them to define the limits of what she might become. The girl who had enlisted in the Army straight out of high school was gone forever, changed by experiences that couldn't be undone. But the woman who remained had been forged by those same experiences into someone capable of extraordinary courage, compassion, and resilience. Standing outside her apartment building, Elena looked up at the late afternoon sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear above the Denver skyline. For the first time in years, when she thought about the future, she felt excitement rather than fear. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for EMT training. Next month, she would begin the academic coursework that would prepare her to save lives in a civilian context. In 6 months, she would be riding in ambulances, responding to emergencies, using her skills to help people during their worst moments. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had found her way back to herself, surrounded by people who cared about her journey, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. It wasn't the ending she had imagined when she first enlisted in the Army, but it was an ending she could live with. More than that, it was a beginning she could believe in. Elena smiled as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, already planning the celebratory dinner she would cook for herself that evening. She had learned to celebrate small victories along the way, recognizing that healing happened in increments rather than dramatic transformations. Tonight was definitely worth celebrating. As she unlocked her door and stepped into her small but comfortable space, Elena realized that the woman who had been injured and silent in that hospital room 6 months ago had found her voice again, and she intended to use it.